Hi, welcome to Grocery COVID Live. I'm Meg Major with Winsight Grocery Business, and joining me for this segment, per usual, is our exec editor, John Springer, our content manager, Kat Martin, and our senior editor, Jenn Strailey. Before I turn it over to you, Phil, I wanted to kind of just tee up our discussion today with the idea that given that social distancing is not expected to end anytime soon, it stands to reason that we're going to see grocery stores vastly different. The plexiglass shields we expect will remain, the heightened sanitation efforts, store employees wearing masks, customers wearing masks, etc. But we also are wondering how the stores are going to look 3 months, 6 months, 9 months from now, and what other changes we might be able to expect to see, and customers will be able to expect to see. Will we see the end of in-store salad bars and hot food bars and all the other self-service departments such as coffee grinding and beverage bars? What becomes of the self-service aspects of supermarkets? Phil, let me turn it to you and get your take on that.
Sure. Yes. Yes to all the above. I think certainly in the short term, until we can come up with better technologies and better equipment, salad bars are gone, soup bars are gone, all those hot food bars are gone, those hot surfaces that have pizzas on them, gone. Any place in the store where anybody can breathe on food, I think is going to be a problem. Now, the question is, from a retailer standpoint, how expensive is it going to be to remove all that equipment, to remove all that plumbing, to remove all that electricity? And what do you do with that space? I mean, that's part of the issue as well, that it's fine to say it's just closed. You can't put a garbage bag over it and ignore it. You've really got to reconfigure the whole store. But frankly, I think that's been in the works for a while, to really redo the store, make half of it, robotics in the back for pickup or delivery, and cut the store smaller into more, service departments, not self-service.
I think it's the flat surfaces and the utensils as well. So the FDA recommendations to restaurants that are reopening are really advising no hot bars whatsoever. And mostly the utensils are what's being singled out as the things with the tongs and the ladles and things that you have to do to transport the food, not necessarily just the breathing, but all the utensils and the surrounding surfaces.
Yeah, I think it's going to be real challenging for those food service operators who have gotten into grocery stores finally, again, with those soups and salads and so on. But it'll be interesting to see. And I know that you have a story talking about how the store is going to change. So it's a must read for everyone. But first, what I want to do is remind everybody that coming up this Thursday at this time, 12:30 p.m. Eastern, 9:30 a.m. Pacific, we're going to have a very special edition of COVID-19 Winsight Grocery Business, which focuses on how the pandemic is changing the meat and poultry industry at a time of record consumer sales in the meat department. So what we've got all this demand, and we have, I think it's up to 30 plants that have now closed. It's anticipated that right now, either because they're fully closed or partially closed, it's affecting about 15% of supply, which is going to be significant for us. Also, a reminder to our viewers, make sure you add your comments or questions below in the comment box on Facebook. And also, I don't know if you all heard the announcement this morning that Instacart is turning profitable. They are set to make $10 million net profit this month as a result of the COVID-19 outbreak. So while we were talking just a couple of months ago about how nobody is making money in delivery, obviously that has changed dramatically. Whether or not it will stay changed once things go back to normal and we have somewhere between 4 and 10% of people instead of a third people ordering online, it'll be interesting to see. So, Jenn, what do you see about the stabilization process of grocery right now?
Well, I mean, it's certainly for some retailers. Kroger has reopened its stores to normal hours in certain areas. HEB expanded its hours on Monday. So did Stater Brothers. It's it's encouraging. And HEB also restored, deli, bakery departments in the store that had kind of gone dark during COVID-19. So it's encouraging to see slowly but surely, perhaps, certain retailers are going back to a bit of normalcy.
But in Denver, in Colorado where you are, so the governor has said, let's reopen everything. But your mayor in Denver is not doing that. So how much of that are we going to see the infighting based on population density? And if you've got, a mayor who says no or yes, and a governor who says yes or no, just the opposite, how's that going to affect grocery stores?
Yeah, I think that's the number one story, just in terms of all businesses. In that grocery stores have been one of the few things that have been able to stay open. Maybe it impacts grocery stores somewhat less, but there's certainly a battle in many states between the major cities, mayors of major cities, and governors wanting to, certain governors wanting to push things open faster than mayors of big cities with large populations are comfortable with.
I think it'll be interesting too, as for the states that the restaurants are starting to open, what's going to happen with grocery there? Like, are people going to go back to restaurants, or are they going to stick with, stick with the grocery and still continue just to shop for every meal from the grocery store? It might be interesting to see on those states that are doing that, to see what's going to happen for the rest of the country.
Yeah, and I think that what's real important is we're seeing this blending, if you would, I think, between supermarkets, restaurants. We've talked about that before, but the average person goes shopping for food, whatever the channel is, 2.2 times a week. They go out for lunch or dinner 4.9 times a week. So how that is going to shift, I think, Kat, to your point, is going to be very interesting. And one of the opportunities that I think that supermarkets have is going to come out of this food gifting. Sally Smithwick, our managing editor, was telling us, she's in Nashville, that basically friends and neighbors are dropping off food to each other just as a way to connect and food gift. And Sally said, hey, wouldn't it be smart if a supermarket decided to put together a box of a food gift that someone else would get delivered to, or you could pick it up and bring it to them. And let's say you had wine, salmon, a salad, and flowers in it. And I made me sit back and say, that's a cool idea. Supermarket should do that. What do you all
we'll
think?
Volunteer to be your recipients. I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah, I think it would be fun, especially, for Kat, who's stuck till the end of May in Chicago.
Yes.
Piggybacking off that thought, Phil, Jenn and I were talking yesterday about, and I joked to Jenn and said, well, it looks like Mother's Day is still on for this year, because the retailers we're seeing now are doing already getting ahead of that with some bundled meals. And Jenn, you might just want to mention to Phil that some of the things that you've been tracking with that.
Yeah, well, I saw that, the Fresh Market is doing a really nice, different brunch options, chocolate covered strawberries, or different, fancy meals that people can pre-order. And, a lot of people, I'm not going to be able to be with my mom on Mother's Day because we're social distancing. So, I think it's that's a nice way to pay tribute to Mom, to send her, if you live in an area that has a supermarket that's doing nice bundled fancy meals like that, would be a nice Mother's Day gift.
Well, I think it's also a great message that supermarkets are sending to their customers that, yeah, we're going through this. We've got some issues. I don't want to talk about meat because we're going to talk about that on Thursday. But, but we can help you go back to normal with those chocolate covered strawberries and things like that. I think that's important. I also want to bring up to us all this idea that we're now hearing, whether it's the supermarket mandating it or the government mandating it, that you can't use reusable bags in supermarkets, that we're returning back to using either single-use plastic bags or single-use paper bags. And do we think that that's going to stick around? Do we have some good news for single-use bag manufacturers here?
I know that the reusable bag manufacturers are really trying to get the message out But again, I think until people get more comfortable, the single-use plastic bags are going to stick around a little bit. I mean, a lot of companies, Giant Eagle, just a couple of months before this happened, completely eliminated single-use plastic bags as well as one of many retailers around the country. But I'm also seeing yesterday that there's an uptick in all single-use plastics, including waters and a lot of things that. But yeah, Phil, that must be a little bit closer to home because California was the leading state that banned plastic bags way back when.
But I also think there's some opportunities for reusable bags, but it's really an engineering opportunity. Why not create antimicrobial reusable bags? We typically have cloth bags, or we have these plastic bags that a lot of supermarkets sell, but they should do their homework and be doing antimicrobial bags or things that we can actually use. Hey, John, your story about reopening the country following the weeks of the coronavirus doesn't mean that a return to normal conditions is anywhere close. What do you mean by that?
Well, building a little bit on what Jenn said, we are seeing a somewhat of a return to normal conditions, right? It's supermarkets plus 10% volume than normal, plus social distancing, plus masks and gloves, and normal hours coming back. And the one aspect of this that I was looking at in this particular article was the capacity constraints put on supermarkets in order to affect proper social distancing in the stores. So, the question came up, what's the right number for that? And, in a lot of cases, Walmart, Kroger, some of the other big companies, are saying, well, what's the fire capacity? And let's chop that in half, and that's the right number. Well, the point that is made in the article is not necessarily that it's right or wrong, but that fire capacity is a function of how many exits there are in a store, and social distancing is about viral protection, and they're not necessarily the same things. So I was able to talk to some, a technologist who's at work on a pretty interesting technology that would use the store surveillance and to analyze the flow using artificial intelligence, of course, analyzing the flow of people and goods in the supermarket, and then coming up with some recommendations about, how we can do this. And perhaps when it comes time for it, the supermarkets can go to their local authorities and say, look, capacity doesn't necessarily have to be set at half fire capacity. It should be set here, and we can show you why. And that would be better, because the more people you keep out of the supermarket at the same time, obviously safety is the major concern, but the more business you can handle is better for everybody, better for the shoppers, much better for the stores. And in a situation where you're limiting the amount of people into a store at one time, that's a bigger concern, especially for some of the smaller stores, because a larger percentage of their sales cut off by capacity constraints.
But the UCFW, and Jenn, correct me if I'm wrong, said the capacity should only be 20 to 30% of normal capacity. That's what they're calling for, not 50%. And again, I'm intrigued with the people that you spoke about with artificial intelligence, because I think it would be kind of cool if what you can do is actually have a beeper go off. If I get too close to you, something in the ceiling registers and goes beep, beep, beep. So, it keeps me away from you.
People concerned about the nanny state aren't going to take to that very nicely, I don't think. But, again, it wasn't necessarily advocating for larger or smaller necessarily, but just a better definition of how we come at that, whether it's 20%, 15%, 30%, 90%. It's a matter of how you figure that out, and not necessarily, let's look at one measure for one thing and apply it to another.
Makes sense.
So,
do you think that this is going to continue? Like, are stores going to are going to start limiting capacity for good, just to make sure that we don't have crowds or whatever?
Well, I think the restaurants are opening up at 25% capacity, at least some of the regulations I've seen. Again, like we talked about before, it's going to be different in every city, every town, every state. And you would imagine that, of the safety measures that have been taken during this pandemic, some of them are going to last longer. And I think, generally tight crowds is the one that everybody understands, and it just makes sense. So again, it's a question of understanding that now. How do we approach that?
John, it's also interesting that occurs to me that when you project ahead, as we're looking really down the line at 3 to 6 to 9 months, thinking about Thanksgiving shopping, that week of the pre-Thanksgiving shopping, that's going to be that's probably a good idea to get their arms around that sooner than later, because when peak holiday season shopping occurs in supermarkets, that's going to be the classic conundrum.
Yeah.
And what about,
to say it again, it's e-commerce. I mean, it's another argument for shopping virtually going forward.
but there is another option. Look at what Schnucks is doing in St. Louis with the reservation. So what you can do is go on their website, make a reservation just the same way you would with a restaurant for what time you want to go shopping. Isn't that a good way to still allow people to come in the stores and still control how many people are in the stores? And will people do it?
Correct.
Yeah, I believe they'll do it. I mean, I guess what we can say is that there's a lot of innovation happening around sort of how to deal with these current conditions that we found ourselves in. And online reservations could be one way. Using, Kroger's using their Q Vision thing, which they normally do to regulate flow to their cashiers. They're counting the number of customers in the store at one time so they know when they're over capacity. Things like that obviously are going to help out.
Does all these technologies and everything that we're talking about change the relationship of a shopper to the supermarket? Do they now think that, this is a necessity, this isn't fun anymore, I can't find new foods, I can't have food samplings going on, so it's going to be a place to go in, get your stuff and get out, or to your point, John, just do everything from e-commerce. What effect is this going to have on consumer relationships?
Fairly profound, I would venture to say. I still think, though, that it's going to be the interim between now and the vaccine being tested, vetted, validated, and tested again. So between that interim is going to be like the real proving ground. But I also think that mobile apps, we ain't seen nothing yet from that with grocers. I think we're really going to be able to watch grocers really harness the power of their apps, be it for making reservations similar to a fast pass. But, again, it's really just watching everybody make it up as we go kind of thing.
And what we should do, the Fivers should get together and we should create an app for self-distancing. So, when you're in a supermarket, you press the button, you get too close to somebody, your phone vibrates or rings or something like that. I think that's a good idea. We should do that. But Jenn, let's go to you on your story about Target and Dollar General. What's going on with shopping at those two retailers in particular?
Yeah, so this kind of touches on what you and Meg were speaking about it in terms of customer loyalty both to the retailer and to brands. It's just that's kind of gone by the wayside with all of this, largely because shoppers can't get the products that they want when they go to the store, and that encourages them to go elsewhere. Kantar did a study recently that 34% of consumers plan to visit a new retailer in the coming weeks, and Target, Walgreens, Dollar General, and Family Dollar were the top stores that shoppers said that they would be exploring in the coming weeks. And they also had some interesting data on, 41% of shoppers, when they can't find what they're looking for, will just do without, but 42% will go, will buy something else, go elsewhere and look for that product or an alternative. So it's also fueling a lot of new product trial. So
do we think when this is all over, the first phase of it, let me talk about that because I want to get into the second phase. First phase of it, that we are going to see a lot of consumers switching stores because either they've been disappointed or conversely, that they've been really happy with how the retailer has handled this, and they build a stronger relationship. I mean, I could argue both things could happen. What do you think?
I mean, Phil, I'd suggest there's a third issue at hand, and I'm not sure whether Jenn's article also addressed this or the Kantar study, but the inconvenience factor. The store that we would maybe like to go to the most, we've got to wait 40 minutes outside to do a line because of the social distancing we were just talking about. So as a result, we've been walking to smaller stores that are less likely to be covered here. Now, the question is, do they make a good enough impression on us so that when things get a little more under control, we don't go back to the store that we wanted to? That's a real question.
And John, also notwithstanding the lines that you have to contend with, but I think in other markets, it's just the sheer hour reduction, that there's still stores that are really closing still at 7 and 8 o'clock at night. So, I mean, while we talked earlier about HEB, and others resuming normal business hours, and even going back to 24 hours, there's still a lot of stores around the country that are operating under limited hours. So that's forcing customers, to me, to go to actually just plain old what's open.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about the store hours, I think it's closely associated with the stock out challenges that they had early in this pandemic, and as Jenn has written earlier, we've been talking about we've been hearing stores thinking that their supply chains are more or less a week or two away from being back to quote unquote normal with a few exceptions, and I think that's going to allow them to extend their hours back again.
So, John, sorry.
I was trying to jump in there.
No, I was just going to go back to our point about, trying different stores. And I know this has been a boon for some of those small independent stores that operate in small towns where they're really seeing a huge uptick, where people maybe used to travel 20 miles to go to a Walmart or, another bigger store, and are now staying closer to home and shopping these little local mom and pop type stores more than they ever had before. It's just a matter of, will they continue to do that? Will that convenience factor still, be an issue 6 months down the line when things are starting to go back to normal? We would hope, because I think they bring a lot of value to the market, but, we'll see.
Plus, if they survive this long, those mom and pops, they're doing something right as it is, so they deserve to have some loyalty.
Yeah. So what happens, and not to be the pessimist here, but what happens if what Dr. Fauci and others are saying, that we're going to cap out, things will go back to normal, and then come this flu season, it's going to hit maybe even harder than it does now. So if in fact that happens, and certainly we pray that it doesn't happen, but if it does, what happens to the supermarkets then? Will the supermarkets have learned from this experience so that the supply chain doesn't have these issues? Do shoppers totally freak out and just go to e-commerce? What do you think is going to be the result if we have that happen?
Yeah, economically more devastating than already, which is going to be a super concern and might supersede a lot of other concerns. But yeah, I mean, I would say that supermarkets have probably learned a tremendous amount from dealing with this. Consumers have learned a lot about dealing with this. And, geez, God forbid it happens again. I think people are going to be better prepared.
Yeah.
Kat, Jenn, what do you think?
I mean, yeah, we've been through it once. I mean, we'll all have our masks now. So,
but you haven't gotten yours yet.
I know, I'm waiting so I can go to the store. But yeah, so I mean, I think if it crops up again, obviously there will be some devastation factor to that, like John was pointing out. But I think, once you go through something once, you've learned your lessons, and maybe next time it won't take so long to implement some of the safety measures that we have already in place.
And Jenn, what do you think about the consumer reaction to this? If it happens again, does the consumer just throw up their hands and they say, oh, I'm just going to do e-commerce, I am never walking into a supermarket again?
I don't think so. I mean, I know that, there's going to be a certain amount of people who stick with online shopping and delivery for sure. And whether that's higher than sort of like the 20%, rate that they were hanging on to, it certainly sounds like it by with Instacart's new numbers. But, I think people will still always want to go to the store. And what I'm seeing is, in my area is a bit more return to normalcy. I mean, I went to Costco for the first time since the pandemic started yesterday. Didn't wait in line, had a pleasant shopping experience. They had almost everything that I was, looking for. Social distancing wasn't a problem. And I keep seeing, every time I go to the store, other shoppers, as I do myself, thanking the people who are working in the stores for being there. Thank you for showing up today. And I just don't think, I think there's this sense that we've all gone through this together, and I don't see people just completely turning their backs on grocery stores.
And to your point, there is a whole new respect for people who work in grocery stores. I'm seeing the exact same thing, people thanking people for coming to work and so on. And at least the reaction when I say it to people who are working in grocery, they're thrilled that somebody appreciates that they're coming there.
Yes.
For sure.
So as I mentioned at the top of the webcast, this Thursday's edition is going to be all about meat. Meg, tell us more about that.
Yeah, Phil. So we're going to have meat expert Anne-Marie Roerink, and she's going to present a webcast tomorrow at, what time is that one? Let me think here. Let me see my notes so I don't goof that up. Anyway, I believe it is 1:30 Central Time. And but Anne-Marie's going to provide highlights of our webcast, which are really going to look into the dramatic gains in meat sales from the initial March 1 inflection point, how rising meat sales have mirrored consumer anxiety levels, and more than anything, the biggest surprises and lesson learned from the panic buying behavior, and really how retailers can sustain in this uncertain time of plant closures, and really how they will be able to direct consumers to be able to ensure that they're going to have what they need when they enter the store, or also to help make substitutes.
Are they going to limit the purchases of meat the way we've seen them limit the purchases of toilet paper?
We have not yet heard that. That's a very provocative thought. I don't know.
Because I think we're going to see hoarding. I mean, with all these stories coming out in the news every second about meat plant closures, how it's affecting the supply chain, I've got to only imagine that this week, today, tomorrow, what we're going to see is a lot of consumers going in, buying as much meat as their freezer or refrigerator can hold.
Yeah, and honestly, meat departments in many parts of the country are still in rough shape. I mean, the supply and demand ratio is still pretty off kilter. So I would agree with you.
So you think we're going to see a lot more vegans?
I don't know. I don't know. A lot more grilled cheeses for sure.
A lot more. Well, that's vegan. So with that, we're going to wrap up another edition of COVID-19 Winsight Grocery Business. Hope you'll join us on Thursday for our special edition on meat. Same time, 12:30 Eastern, 9:30 Pacific. Until then, thank you for joining us and be safe.
Thank you.